"That's my brother's grave." He screamed as the medal was given to a stranger. They told him to be quiet, to stay still. But how could he? How could anyone stay silent when the medal meant for his fallen brother was being pinned? "On a complete stranger? That's my brother's grave!" James Carter screamed, his voice cracking through the hushed crowd at the military cemetery. The air was thick with grief, yet that raw cry shattered the fragile peace like glass. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal. The morning sun barely warmed the rows of flag-draped caskets, their colors muted beneath the cold March sky. Veterans and families stood shoulder to shoulder, faces etched with sorrow and pride, honoring those who paid the ultimate price. Among them was Sergeant David Carter's youngest brother, James, clutching a folded flag tighter than life itself. He had traveled miles for this solemn day, the day the nation would finally recognize David's sacrifice with the medal he deserved. But the ceremony took a dark turn when the medal was handed not to James, but to another man, someone who had never served alongside David, never shared his battles, never earned that honor. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Murmurs grew louder. A young boy in a uniform too big for him looked up at his mother, eyes wide and questioning. "Why is that man getting the medal, Mom?" The mother's lips pressed together, holding back a flood of tears and words. James's heart pounded as he stepped forward, desperate to reclaim the truth before it slipped away. This was a sacred moment, supposed to be filled with respect and remembrance. Instead, it became a battlefield of injustice, where a family's pain was overshadowed by a cruel error no one dared to correct. Who was the stranger standing with that medal? And how could something so wrong happen in a place meant for honor? Today, we uncover the story behind the stolen medal, the brothers' fight for justice, and the truth that refuses to be buried. The cemetery was silent except for the faint rustle of flags fluttering in the cold wind. Rows of graves stretched endlessly, each one a story of sacrifice and loss. This was supposed to be a place of solemn respect, a sacred ground where grief and honor walked hand in hand. Yet, on this day, the air was thick, not just with mourning, but with an unbearable weight of betrayal. James Carter stood frozen near his brother David's grave, his hands trembling as he stared at the man holding the medal, John Mitchell, Osaks, civilian who had no connection to the fallen soldier. The medal gleamed cruelly in the sunlight, a symbol meant to honor courage and sacrifice, now tarnished by a mistake no one seemed willing to admit. Family members whispered anxiously, exchanging glances filled with disbelief. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Veterans shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the solemn-faced officers present could not mask the flicker of confusion and unease. James's heart ached as memories of David flooded his mind. The younger brother who had enlisted with a quiet determination, the soldier who faced danger with unwavering bravery, the man who had given everything for his country. How could the system, the very institution meant to protect and honor these sacrifices, get this so wrong? An older officer approached James, attempting to offer words of comfort, but James shook his head. "This isn't comfort. It's an injustice," he whispered fiercely, his voice low but unwavering. The crowd's silence was shattered as James stepped forward, voice rising with a mixture of pain and anger. "That medal belongs to my brother, not him," he declared, pointing toward John. "He never served. He never earned it." Gasps spread through the audience. Some looked shocked. Others shifted awkwardly, unsure how to respond. The officials exchanged uneasy glances, but no immediate action was taken. In that moment, James realized this was not just about a medal. It was about respect, about truth, about demanding the dignity his brother deserved. The sacred space meant for healing and remembrance had become a stage for a fight that no family should ever have to endure. As the ceremony continued, James refused to sit down. His eyes burned with determination, his fist clenched tight as he vowed to uncover how such an injustice could happen and to make sure it never happened again. Because honoring the fallen is more than ceremony. It's a promise, a sacred trust. And today, that trust was broken. As the tension thickened around the misplaced medal, a figure emerged from the back of the crowd, a man whose presence immediately demanded attention, though it was clear his authority wasn't earned through respect, but rather seized without question. Detective Marcus Reynolds stepped forward, his badge gleaming under the overcast sky, yet his expression was cold, almost detached. His eyes scanned the crowd with an air of superiority, like a king surveying his domain. To many, Marcus was the law incarnate, but to those who knew the story, he was the very embodiment of unchecked power. Reynolds didn't wait for an invitation. Without ceremony, he cut through the murmurs, his voice sharp and commanding. "This isn't a place for disruption," he said, eyes locking onto James Carter, whose defiant stance had become the heart of the unrest. "You will sit down, or you'll be removed." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some nodded obediently, others stared, their loyalty divided. No one moved to challenge Reynolds. Authority had never required permission here, only compliance. Yet, James didn't back down. His voice carried the raw strength of someone who had lost everything but refused to lose his dignity. "This isn't disruption, it's justice, and you, detective, are standing on the wrong side of it." Reynolds sneered, stepping closer, his presence looming like a storm cloud. "I'm here to keep order, not to entertain your grief-fueled accusations." Behind his steely exterior, whispers told a darker tale. Marcus Reynolds was a man who wielded his badge as a weapon, who thrived on control rather than truth. This was his stage, and he wasn't about to let anyone steal the spotlight. As the crowd held its breath, the tension between James and Reynolds crackled like electricity, two forces colliding in a battle over respect, honor, and who truly had the right to wield power in this sacred space, authority without permission. That was the line Marcus Reynolds crossed, and the moment the fragile peace shattered. The air felt heavier now, thick with unspoken anger and disbelief. The cemetery, once a solemn sanctuary, had turned into a battlefield of wills. Detective Marcus Reynolds, his jaw clenched tight, made a move no one expected, a move that would shatter the fragile line between authority and abuse. Without warning, Reynolds drew his service weapon, the metallic click echoing sharply in the stillness. Gasps rippled through the crowd, eyes widened in shock. Time seemed to freeze as the barrel of the gun locked on James Carter, who stood frozen but unflinching. "Drop your hands," Reynolds barked, voice rough as gravel. "Now!" James's heartbeat thundered in his ears, but his hands remained steady at his sides. "I'm not the one who's done wrong here," he said firmly, his voice calm despite the chaos unfolding. Reynolds's finger tightened on the trigger, not with intent to fire, but enough to send a clear message. The threat hung in the air, like a storm cloud ready to burst. The families, the veterans, the strangers who had come to pay respects, they all watched, paralyzed, as authority descended into tyranny. Mothers clutched children closer, elders muttered prayers under their breath, and friends exchanged horrified glances. Someone called out, "Put the gun down!" But Reynolds ignored the voices, his eyes cold and unyielding. This was no longer about order or respect. It was about control, fear, and the raw abuse of power. James took a slow, deliberate step forward, voice steady but rising with defiance. "This is my brother's grave, and you don't get to take that away from me." The crowd erupted, shouts, mingling with sobs, a chorus of outrage and pain. Then came the moment that changed everything. An officer nearby lunged forward, wrestling Reynolds' arm away, the gun clattering to the ground. The standoff dissolved into chaos. Security scrambled, voices yelled commands, and James was pulled back by friends. But the damage was done. The line was crossed. What was meant to be a day of honor had become a moment of reckoning, a stark reminder that some battles are fought not just on foreign soil, but right here, within the very spaces meant to be sacred. The moment the footage hit social media, the world stopped. What began as a quiet, sacred ceremony became a wildfire, spreading faster than anyone anticipated. The shaky video, captured by a young attendee with a trembling hand, showed Detective Marcus Reynolds pointing his gun at James Carter, a grieving brother standing before his fallen sibling's grave. The raw fear, the tension, the blatant abuse of power, all laid bare for millions to witness. Within hours, hashtags flooded Twitter. Justice for James, sacred not silent, honor not hate. News outlets scrambled to cover the story, replaying the footage with stunned anchors struggling to find words that matched the horror on screen. Veteran groups issued statements condemning the actions. Civil rights organizations called for immediate investigations. James became more than a man. He was a symbol, a stark reminder that injustice still lurked in places meant for peace. Across the nation, people felt the impact. Protests ignited outside police stations, demanding accountability. Candlelight vigils sprang up in town squares. Strangers who had never known James or his brother found themselves united in outrage and sorrow. In homes and offices, the video was shared again and again, sparking conversations about respect, race, and power. But amid the noise, James remained quiet, his grief raw, but his resolve hardening. He knew this was no longer just about him or his brother. This was about every voice that had been silenced, every injustice ignored in the name of authority. Behind the scenes, the police department scrambled. Internal Affairs launched an investigation, but the public's trust was already cracking. Leaders were forced to answer uncomfortable questions. The badge no longer guaranteed respect. It was under the harsh glare of scrutiny. Social media warriors debated fiercely, allies rallied, and critics pushed back, but the world had awakened to a truth long buried. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, the air thick with anticipation and unspoken tension. Reporters jostled for position, cameras flashing relentlessly, capturing every moment as if the very future of justice hinged on the day's proceedings. James Carter sat at the front, his jaw set firm, eyes steeled with determination. Across from him, Detective Marcus Reynolds appeared calm, too calm, as if the weight of what he'd done hadn't yet fully sunk in. But the room felt heavy with the unspoken truth. This was more than a trial of one man. It was a reckoning. The judge's gavel slammed down, demanding silence. The prosecutor began, methodically laying out the case. Footage of the funeral, the raised gun, the commands shouted in fury. Every detail was replayed, dissected, undeniable. Witnesses were called, family members, military officers, and civilians alike, each testimony a thread weaving a tapestry of injustice. Detective Reynolds's defense faltered under the relentless scrutiny. His excuses, a misunderstanding, following protocol, felt hollow, empty echoes against the chorus of voices demanding accountability. But then came the moments that electrified the room. James stood when called to testify, his voice steady but carrying the weight of heartbreak. "That day," he said, "I wasn't just standing at my brother's grave. I was standing for every soldier, every family, every person who's ever been told to bow their heads and stay silent." His eyes locked on Reynolds, unyielding. "And I refused." The courtroom fell into a tense silence, the kind that presses on your chest. The judge's gaze softened momentarily, recognizing the courage it took to speak such raw truth. Outside, crowds gathered, holding their breath as live feeds streamed every word. Social media exploded with support. The world was watching, demanding justice, demanding change. Inside, the defense tried to chip away at James's credibility, but his resolve never wavered. Each question only strengthened his defiance. In that moment, James was no longer just a grieving brother. He was a symbol of resistance, of dignity, standing tall against abuse of power. When the day ended, the courtroom emptied, but the impact lingered. This was not the end. It was the moment justice took a stand, and the beginning of a fight that would echo far beyond those walls. The trial had become more than just a legal proceeding. It was a crucible, melting away the carefully crafted facade of justice to reveal a system riddled with cracks. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, the tension palpable as every layer of deception was peeled back, exposing uncomfortable truths. The prosecution's relentless investigation uncovered a troubling pattern, a culture within the department where authority was wielded without accountability, where loyalty to the badge often overshadowed the oath to serve and protect. Internal memos surfaced, showing deliberate attempts to cover up misconduct, protect officers who crossed the line, and silence those who dared to speak out. The defense tried desperately to hold on to their narrative of isolated incident, but the evidence was overwhelming. Testimonies from former officers revealed stories of intimidation, systemic bias, and a deep-rooted resistance to change. These voices, once muffled in the shadows, now resonated loudly in the courtroom. At the heart of the storm stood Detective Marcus Reynolds, no longer just a man on trial, but a symbol of a flawed institution. His confident exterior began to crack as cross-examinations probed not just his actions, but the very environment that shaped them. James Carter watched with unwavering focus. His pain transformed into resolve, knowing that this battle was not only personal, but pivotal for the future. The courtroom had become a battlefield where the system's mask was ripped away, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable realities. Outside, protests erupted, fueled by the trial's revelations. The public demanded sweeping reforms, transparency, and justice for all. The media spotlight intensified, shining on the corruption festering behind closed doors. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as the verdict was read aloud. It was not just a judgment on one man, but a reckoning on a system that had long shielded the wrongdoers behind a veneer of respectability. No cheers, no applause filled the room, only a solemn hush, as if everyone present felt the weight of what had just unfolded. Detective Marcus Reynolds sat rigid, his once defiant posture now crumbling under the gravity of the sentence. For the victims and their families, the decision was bittersweet. It brought justice, but it could never erase the scars left behind. The wounds ran deep, far beyond the courtroom walls. James Carter's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but he stood firm, knowing this was a victory not just for him or his brother, but for every voice that had been silenced for too long. His fight had ignited a movement demanding accountability, fairness, and change. Outside, the crowd gathered not to celebrate, but to reflect. The headlines screamed of justice served, but the truth was more complex. This was only the beginning. The system had been exposed, its failures laid bare, and the call for reform echoed louder than ever before. Behind closed doors, police departments nationwide began reviewing their policies. Training programs were revamped, and oversight committees were strengthened. The trial had sent a clear message. No one was above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it. For those directly affected, healing would be a long road. But in that solemn courtroom, amidst the quiet reckoning, hope was kindled. A hope that one day, sacred spaces would no longer be tainted by injustice, and that true honor would be upheld, not just in words, but in actions. As the courtroom emptied, the atmosphere remained heavy with reflection. Justice had been served, but the real work was just beginning, building a future where respect, dignity, and truth would stand unshaken. If this story touched your heart, Don't forget to smash that thumbs up and hit subscribe for more unforgettable, emotional, and viral true stories. We want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell us, where in the world are you watching from?